The vote was not going to be close. I knew that before I called the chamber to order. What I did not know, what none of us on the conclave of 7 knew, when we filed into seats above the tribunal floor, was how long we would sit in silence after the footage ended. Not the silence of disagreement, beep. The silence of people who have just watched something that does not fit any category they own. My name is Councillor Varathosaloon. I have held the 3rd seat of the conclave for 22 years. In that time I have reviewed after-action records from 14 separate conflicts, classified materials from 8 border engagements, and the full archived testimony from the Draven incursion. I have seen what war leaves behind. I have read what it costs. I believed, going into that chamber, that I had a reasonably complete picture of what intelligent species under combat could and could not sustain. I was wrong. Not about the data is what it is. I was wrong about what the data meant. The case before us was formally designated Review Proceeding 7 Callum. An inquiry into the conduct and outcome of the siege of Outpost Veen, a conclave-administered communications relay on the outer edge of the Tertian Drift. The outpost had been seized 11 months prior by a Kelvari advance unit as a staging point for signals disruption ahead of a larger campaign. The conclave had dispatched a response team. That team had arrived to find the Kelvari already entrenched, the outpost's 2 surviving original crew members dead, and 1 human liaison officer, present at Vayan on a routine diplomatic rotation, defending the relay corps from a maintenance corridor in the outpost's lower deck. What followed was 19 hours and 41 minutes of documented engagement. The proceedings were not about whether the outpost was eventually retaken. It was. They were about the human, about what she did, and what it meant. And whether our current threat classification architecture had any category that adequately described it. The answer to that last question, I can tell you now, was no. Advocate Examiner Drun Sovat presented the record in chronological segments. He is a methodical man, Sovat, good at building cases layer by layer, letting weight accumulate before he draws a conclusion. That morning he simply threaded footage into the display above the floor, noted the timestamp at the start of each segment, and stepped back. First segment, Hour 1. The maintenance corridor from the angle of a fixed internal sensor that the Kelvari had either missed or not bothered. Disable. The human, I have her name in the record, I will use it here, because she deserves to be named, not filed. Staff Liaison Reina Cassis, 34 years old, Earthborn, assigned to diplomatic rotation in the Drift for 8 months. She was not a soldier. That is the first thing to understand. Her posting was administrative. She had standard issue sidearm authorization, the same as any conclave civilian posting in a contested zone, but no combat specialization, no tactical designation. The record listed her occupational classification as coordination and liaison, grade IV. She had a desk. She sent dispatches. She sat in rooms with alien administrators and kept notes. What she was doing in that corridor, in Hour 1, was inventorying what she had. She did it methodically. Not frantically, methodically. She moved along the maintenance wall, noted each access panel, each conduit junction, each emergency supply cache, with even pace you use when you are counting something you expect to need later. She found 3 emergency ration packs, a thermal blanket, 2 lengths of conduit brace, a pressurized seal compound canister, and a maintenance toolkit with 11 implements. She laid them out in a row, crouched over them for a moment, and then began to work. By the end of Hour 1, she had constructed 2 trip mechanisms from the conduit braces and set them at the corridor's 2 approach points. Sovat let the footage run without commentary. The chamber was quiet. Second segment, Hour 3. The Kelvari had found her position. First approach team, 4 soldiers, light armor, standard breach kit, came down the eastern axis. They hit the first mechanism. The mechanism was not sophisticated. It was loud, and it was enough. The lead soldier stumbled, the formation broke, and Reina Cassis fired twice from a recessed alcove at the corridor's midpoint. 2 Kelvari down, 2 retreating. She did not pursue. She pulled back to the relay core, checked the door seal, and sat down on the floor with her back to the wall. From the angle of the sensor above her, we could see her face. She was breathing hard. She reached into one of the ration packs, ate half of it with mechanical focus, closed her eyes for approximately 4 minutes. Then she got up and began repositioning. Sovat paused the footage. The Kelvari unit commander, he said, at this point issued an internal assessment to his senior staff. The human liaison was listed as a low-priority complication. His exact words, translated from the Kelvari tactical frequency: 1 civilian, no support, no armor, finite ammunition, contain and exhaust. He let that sit. He revised that assessment, Sovat said, at hour 7, third segment, hour 6.5. The Kelvari had made 3 more approaches by this point, each probing for a new angle. None had reached the relay core. 2 more Kelvari soldiers had been taken out of the engagement. One by a second trip mechanism she had built from the maintenance toolkit. One by a pressurized discharge from the seal compound canister, which she had rigged into the eastern ventilation coupling. She had expended 12 rounds of sidearm ammunition. The display on her sidearm, visible in one close-angle sensor capture, showed 7 rounds remaining. She had eaten the second half of the first ration pack. She had not slept. Her left arm, from a glancing contact with a Kelvari dispersal charge at hour 4, showed clear signs of thermal tissue damage along the forearm, visible in the sensor feed as discoloration, visible in the way she periodically shifted it when she moved. She had wrapped it with material from the thermal blanket. She did not appear to modify her behavior around the injury in any strategic way. She used the arm when she needed to. At hour 6.5, one of the Kelvari soldiers, attempting a solo approach through the ventilation coupling she had already compromised once, got within 4 meters before she neutralized him, was close enough that there was a brief physical engagement before the sidearm came into play. The soldier outweighed her by a considerable margin. It did not resolve in the soldier's favor. Sovat said nothing. He advanced the footage. 4th segment, hour 9. The Kelvari commander had by this point requested a secondary fire team from the advance unit's reserve, and that team was 11 hours out. His revised internal assessment, which Sovat read into the record without inflection: the liaison is not behaving as a civilian under pressure. She is not attempting to negotiate, signal surrender, or locate an exit route. She is holding ground. Adjust timeline and approach. What I remember most clearly from the footage of hour 9 is not the tactical picture. It is a moment that Sovat did not highlight. I almost missed it myself. At approximately the 9:14 mark, Raina Cassie sat in the relay core alcove and looked directly at the internal sensor above her, not for long, maybe 3 seconds. Expression was not fear, and it was not defiance, and it was not the flat emptiness of shock. It was something I did not have a word for at the time. I have thought about it since. The closest I can come is, she was taking stock, quietly, privately, with full information and no audience. She was assessing the situation and deciding what she intended to do about it. And then she looked away and went back to work. 5th segment, hour 14. The secondary fire team's arrival had been moved up. A Kelvari shuttle had docked at hour 11, bringing 6 additional soldiers and a directed energy suppression rig. She had heard it dock. We could see in the sensor feed, the moment she registered the sound, the fractional pause, the continuation of what she was doing. The directed energy rig was brought into the eastern access corridor at hour 13. It was a crew-served weapon, 2 operators, designed to clear a fortified position without requiring a breach. The Kelvari set it at the far end of the corridor, outside her effective range, powered it up. Sovat paused here. The rig deployed a sustained field, he said, across the full width of the eastern corridor. Document intensity, it would have been, in any reasonable physiological model, acutely painful, disorienting, functionally incapacitating within 4 to 6 minutes of exposure for any species in our combined medical database. He let a half-beat of silence in. She was not in the eastern corridor, he said. She had moved to the western maintenance shaft 90 minutes earlier. While they were positioning the rig, she had heard them discussing the deployment on the open Kelvari tactical channel. She had pulled the channel from the outpost communications board. She does not speak Kelvari. She recognized the technical terminology for a suppression rig from a conclave briefing document she had, apparently read during her rotation. From a briefing document about a weapon that she had read 8 months earlier, ration for a diplomatic posting. Nobody laughed. The chamber was very quiet. 6th segment, hour 17. 5 rounds of ammunition remaining, confirmed by sensor. The thermal damage to her left arm had worsened. The homemade wrap was visible, but the arm continued to function. She had eaten the third and final ration pack, systematically, in portions, spacing it across the hours. The second trip mechanism had been retrieved and rebuilt into a variant configuration she had devised around hour 12. The seal compound canister was empty. The Kelvari had lost 9 soldiers removed from effective action. They held the rest of the outpost. She held the relay core and 12 meters of maintenance corridor. At hour 17, the Kelvari commander, his third and final internal assessment, logged 14 minutes before the Conclave response team's shuttle entered sensor range, transmitted a single line to his unit. Sovat read it without preamble. Do not enter the corridor until the relief unit is suppressed. The human has not stopped, and I do not have a model for when she will. He did not have a model for when she will. I wrote that phrase down. I still have the note. When the Conclave response team breached the outpost at hour 19 and 41 minutes, they found the relay core intact, the communication systems active. She had maintained them, in between, because that was her assigned function. And Reyna Cassis in the maintenance corridor, seated, back to the wall, sidearm in her right hand. 3 rounds remaining. The team medic's initial field assessment entered into the record. Thermal burn, left forearm, grade 2 to 3, force bruising, left shoulder and rib cage. Laceration above the right eyebrow, self-dressed with kit materials, moderate dehydration, severe sleep deficit, estimated 20+ hours without rest. She had asked the medic before allowing treatment whether the relay core signal was still transmitting cleanly. The medic confirmed it was. She said good, and then she sat back and let them work on her arm. I am not a physician, but I understand enough of basic physiology, across enough species, to know that what the medic's list described was not a body that had been preserved from harm. It was a body that had absorbed harm, continued to function through it, and not yet been given permission to stop. Sovat concluded his presentation. He did not editorialize. He moved to the formal question before the conclave, whether Outpost Vane should be reclassified, whether the human liaisons conduct merited commendation under conclave framework, and whether the current threat classification tier for human combatants in contested zones required revision. The chamber discussed the first 2 questions in approximately 9 minutes. The third question took 4 hours. Not because we disagreed about the answer. We did not. The disagreement was about what the answer implied, and how far its implications ran, and whether our existing classification architecture had anywhere to put it. The problem was this. Threat classification tiers are organized around measurable quantities: firepower, defensive rating, tactical capability, training level, doctrine available support. These things can be assessed, tabulated, compared. A species' soldiers sit in a tier because their performance envelope fits within a defined range. You adjust for specialization. You note that a given species infantry performs at the upper end of its tier when defending fixed positions, or the lower end when deprived of communications. But the envelope has edges. It can be exceeded in exceptional cases. The exceptions are exceptional. What Reyna Cassis had demonstrated over 19 hours and 41 minutes was not an exceptional case of a known capability. It was the apparent absence of a limiting variable we had assumed was universal. We had always assumed, as a design principle in the classification architecture, that a combatant's effective performance degrades proportionally with resource depletion. Remove ammunition, and effectiveness falls. Remove food, remove rest, remove medical support, remove numerical advantage, remove positional advantage. The performance envelope shrinks. At some point, the threshold for cessation is crossed. This is not a commentary on courage. It is physiology. It is how organisms work. Every species in the database has a depletion curve. Every depletion curve has a floor. The footage from Outpost Vane suggested that Reyna Cassis's floor, if it existed at all, was somewhere below the point at which the Kelvari commander had stopped being able to model it. At hour 19, prived of all meaningful resource except the physical ability to continue, she had asked what came next. We voted 7-0 to open a new classification subcategory. We spent 6 weeks arguing about what to call it. The approved designation, Now in the formal record is sustained operational persistence. Class 1, defined as the capacity to maintain effective contested zone function across a progressive compounding resource depletion with no observed threshold for voluntary cessation. There is currently one species in that subcategory. We have begun the process of reviewing historical engagement records. Every contact with a human combatant logged in our database over the last 40 years to determine how many other entries belong there. The preliminary figure, as of the date I am writing this, is high enough that several members of the review committee have requested a separate proceeding just to discuss. It means I find, writing this account, that I keep returning to that moment at hour 9, 3 seconds looking at the sensor, taking stock. I have reviewed hundreds of hours of engagement footage in 22 years. I know what fear looks like across many faces and many species. I know what resignation looks like, and determination, and the particular still quality that comes over a person who has decided they are not going to survive but intends to account for themselves before the end. What I saw in Raina Cassis's face at hour 9 was none of those things. She knew exactly what she had, and exactly what was coming, and she had done the calculation, and the calculation had produced a result that apparently did not include stopping. Not because the math was favorable, it was not favorable, because the question of stopping had not come up in the calculation at all. That is the part I cannot classify, the endurance. Endurance is a measurable variable, and we have now measured it, and it is being filed accordingly. The part I cannot classify is the absence of the question. In all of our models, all of our classification architecture, all of the doctrine we have built over centuries of contact with dozens of species, somewhere in every model, there is a variable for the point at which a combatant asks whether to continue. We cannot find that variable in the human data. We are not sure it is there.